Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining today's NSP webinar, Preparing for Closeout Using DRGR Reports. My name is Sandy Patel. I am with TDA, a technical assistance provider for HUD. I will be serving as your host today. I'm going to run through some technical instructions on how to ask questions and things like that before I hand it off to our wonderful presenters. Today's webinar audio is broadcasted through your computer speakers. It would be best to use the dial-in number if you have low bandwidth, as you may experience interruptions in your audio sound. If you choose to dial in, please mute your computer audio to avoid hearing an echo. Please close the email and all other programs on your computer and silence your cell phone and give your undivided attention to our presenters today. If you have any technical problems, you can email Ernie Hernandez at ehernandez@tdainc.org, or you can send a chat message to the host, and that will come directly to me, and I can help you with any issues that you might be having. All participants will be muted during the webinar. Questions can only be asked in writing using the Q&A tool. You can ask a written question at any point during the presentation. The panelists will collect those and answer them when we stop for questions. To ask a written question, use the Q&A tool. It is located on the right-hand side of the WebEx screen. You can see a screenshot of what it looks like up on the screen. If you do not see it, click on the triangle and it will expand the box. Please ask questions to all panelists. Then just type your question in the box and click send. Again, those you can do at any point during the presentation. All the questions will be answered verbally. We may not be able to answer all the questions, but we will try to answer the common ones first. Please send additional unanswered and private questions to Jennifer Alpha at jalpha@tdainc.org. With that, I'm going to hand it off to Jennifer Alpha with TDA.
Thank you, Sandy. Welcome, everyone, to today's latest edition of NSP webinars on preparing for closeout using DRGR reports. As Sandy mentioned, my name is Jennifer Alpha with TDA, and I'll be assisting with moderating and presenting today's session. We will go through our whole presentation today, and then at the end, we'll take some questions. And so please stay on the line for an opportunity to ask your DRGR and NSP questions to our team of HUD folks that we have on the line here today. I just want to remind everyone that today's session is being recorded and an archive will be created on the HUD Resource Exchange website. The archive will include both the audio recording, the slides, and then a written transcript as well. Today with us on the webinar, we have Jesse Hanforth-Combe, John Laswick, Ebony Madian, and Jerry Santana, and Larry Reyes. And with TDA, you have myself, Jennifer, Ernie Hernandez, and Sandy Patel. So I'll turn it over to HUD for a few minutes to give you an introduction, say hello, and then we'll get started with the slides. Hello? Yes, is someone there at HUD taking a few minutes there to give us a hello. Perhaps there's a little bit of a technical glitch there, so I will go ahead and get started, and we can always do. Oh, there we go. Sorry about that.
Okay. All right, thanks. This is John Laswick, and we're glad that you tuned in today. There's 177 people on the line, and so I think that indicates there's a lot of interest in this topic. I think most of you are trying to move towards closing your grants out, and today's presentation is about an important sub-assembly of that, which is, getting your own, books in order. and that can be a daunting task. So we're going to try to walk you through it. We also will have DRGR technical assistance available shortly on a sign-up basis, so you could call in for an hour and have an expert help you through it. You know, we're interested in having you close out these grants, but we're more interested in having you have a good outcomes in your program. So if for some reason things have gone poorly, please get in touch, and we'll see if we can't help you straighten something out. I don't want you to rush into a closeout just because we seem to be pushing for closeouts. We really want you to have a high-quality program and good outputs and good outcomes. So, but today we're lucky to have Jesse Hanforth-Combe, who I'm sure will be interjecting words of wisdom throughout the presentation. And so we'll turn it back to Jennifer to get the program started.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so for today's topics, we'll be talking about why the Disaster Recovery Grant Reporting System, or DRGR, is important. We'll also be going over where all this information in DRGR actually comes from, so that you have an understanding of how did it get there in case you need to make corrections. And then we'll be talking about how to use the DRGR reports to prepare for closeout. That's going to be the bulk of the presentation today, and it is focused on reading the reports. We will talk a little bit about how you make changes in DRGR, but we are not going to go into long technical explanations where we walk through every click that you have to make in the system to make corrections, but we'll point you in the right direction, and we'll also give you citations to the user manual so you know right where to go to get some help. And then as well, like we do in all the webinars, we'll point you to all the other resources that are out there. There are many, many DRGR resources on the HUD Resource Exchange, almost to the point where it could maybe be a little bit overwhelming, but there are some real good key ones that we'll point you to so that you know where to find help when you need it. And then, of course, we'll take some questions at the end of the session. So talking about why DRGR is important. It's important because this is where all of the NSP data is stored. This data is used to assess performance and compliance by grantees, so it's really important that the data that you put into the system is accurate and complete. Now, the action plans and the QPRs are where the grantees can tell their story, and this is a really great feature of DRGR. Grantees are able to tell their story in the system in ways that can be really beneficial to the grantees. There are lots of places to build out narrative, to talk about your programs. There are also ways to upload additional supporting information like photographs or slide presentations or additional spreadsheets. So there's lots of ways to tell your story in the system, and that's why DRGR is important, because no one can tell your story as well as you can. These reports are also used by HUD, Congress, and the media. So they're not just HUD looking at this information to make sure you comply, but HUD gets requests from Congress all the time for data, and then the media is also always wondering what folks are doing with all the federal money that comes into the communities. And just to let you know, some people don't always realize this, but there is actually a DRGR public portal, and we'll talk about that a little bit throughout the presentation today too, but information is available to the public through the DRGR public portal, and so it's a good idea to make sure that all your information in DRGR is complete and accurate. So where does DRGR get all this information? So DRGR is a reporting system. It's really important to remember that, because what that means is that it only knows what the grantee tells it. So if there's not information in the system, it's because probably you didn't put it there. Or if there's something that's wrong, it's because perhaps it was reported incorrectly over time. So there are some few instances where there may be a system glitch and it needs to be corrected by the programmers, but overwhelmingly the information that's in there is in there because the grantee put it there. So that's an important thing to understand. The information is collected in DRGR as the grantees build out their activities in the action plan module. It's also collected as you process vouchers and program income receipts in the drawdown module. So DRGR is always collecting information from you. Additionally, when you do your quarterly performance reports, your QPRs, your accomplishment and expenditure data is also added to the system, and this is all the information that gets collected and summarized into the reports that we'll be talking about later. It's important to understand where the information comes from because it'll help you better understand how to make the corrections if you happen to find any errors. So let's talk about the kinds of information that goes into the action plan and the QPR. In the action plan, you'll have to understand first that the action plan is really the foundation of all the information in DRGR. So as you build out that action plan, the action plan is going to provide the base information for the functions that happen in the drawdown module, as well as the setup of the QPR. So it's really important that the information initially set up in the action plan was set up properly. Now, the action plan contains grant-level program income estimates. Just at the grant level, we estimate program income. So that is estimated in the action plan. It also includes the project and activity level budgets and narratives. It includes activity proposed accomplishments. Now, the actual accomplishments will be reported later in your QPR, but the action plan includes those proposed accomplishments for each activity. It also lists the activity status. And so we point out a few of these things because there's some of the things that we'll be talking about here today, some of the data we'll be talking about today that's included in the action plan, but there is other information in the action plan as well because it is the foundation of the whole reporting system. Now, most grantees have adjusted their action plans along the way as they work through their programs and won't need to make any substantial changes in advance of closeout, but some action plan modifications will likely be necessary, and we'll point those out when we get to some of the reports later. All right, so let's then talk about this other big piece of DRGR where we're collecting information, the QPR. Now, DRGR automatically pulls information into the QPR from the drawdown and action plan modules to populate some of the descriptive and financial data that appears each quarter. And we're going to show you a little bit about the breakdown of the data on the next slide. Other information related to the actual accomplishments of the grantees is reported by the grantee itself at the grant and activity levels in the QPR. So each quarter, the grantee is going in and reporting on actual accomplishments achieved during that quarter at both the grant and activity levels. Now, it's important to understand that the source of the information in the QPR so that you can understand where you make corrections. And so we'll take a look at this next chart here that shows you the data sources for the QPR. So as you can see here, information like project number and title, activity number and title, budgets, activity types, national objectives, performance goals. Those are things you set up way back in your action plan. The QPR, as it builds out its summaries, is going to pull that information from the action plan into the QPR. You don't have to do anything for those pieces. The drawdown module is going to give the QPR its information about obligations, grant fund and program income draws, and program income received. Again, you don't have to do anything in the QPR with these. It automatically gets pulled in from the drawdown module. Now, this next box, this red box here, QPR, these are the things that the grantee is actually entering each and every quarter. So for activities where there has been progress, only activities where there's been progress and you've met a national objective, you have to meet a national objective before you report on these things. You're going to be reporting on activity beneficiaries assisted, activity addresses assisted, performance accomplishments, and then for all activities, you'd be reporting on expenditures if you've made any in the quarter. And so it's important to understand that these are the pieces that you're actually manually inputting each quarter. This other information is really getting pulled from other places in DRGR. Okay. So there's three main types of information that gets reported into the QPR each quarter. There are narratives, there's financial information, and there are accomplishments. We'll talk a few minutes about the narratives. Now, the narratives are describing progress at the grant and activity levels. There are places to input narratives at both levels. Narratives should be complete and tell the program story. So this is the best place to really explain what you're doing with your program. It's also a great place to explain if something didn't happen to go quite as you planned it with your program, because this is the opportunity for you to tell your story. Now, you may want to consult your field office representative for guidance on how much information or the kinds of information that they would like to see in your QPR, but the general advice is to just tell the best story that you can in the most complete way regarding your program. So for financial data, as I mentioned, most of the information here is pulled into the QPR by DRGR from information that's been entered previously through the drawdown and action plan modules. However, the one piece of financial data that you do have to enter each quarter is your expenditures. So expenditure data is entered by the grantee each quarter. Very often I've found in working with grantees that people sometimes forget to enter this data some quarters, and then so over time you get a little bit of a disconnect between your amount that you've drawn and the amount that you've expended. And we'll talk about that later, but that's something that would need to be fixed before closeout. So accomplishments. This is probably the most significant piece of reporting in the QPR. Now the accomplishments, things like the number of low or moderate income beneficiaries, their races, green measures, addresses, things like that, those accomplishments are only entered into the QPR after you've met a national objective. And so that's really important to understand that you need to meet that national objective before you report on those accomplishments. So any errors that you might find as you go through your QPRs or you go through the reports and you find errors, they should be corrected in your current quarter QPR. Audit is never going to go back and reopen old QPRs to figure out, okay, where was it the second quarter of 2012 when we made that mistake? That's not important. It's just important that you fix it. And so in the current quarter's QPR, you would make any corrections, and then it's always a good idea to include in your narrative what you're correcting and why. And alert your field office representative through an email to describe the changes that you've made. Okay, so now let's talk about how you can actually figure out, well, what's been put in there over time. These programs have been going on for quite a long time. You may not always be the person who started the program. There may be many people between you and the first person who started the program who's been entering data into the system, and so you want to know exactly what kind of information has been entered into DRGR over time. So one thing you can do is you can review your draft final QPR. Now the draft final QPR is a document that's pulled together in the reports module. This is going to provide cumulative summaries of financial data and accomplishment for all activities, including narratives. So your QPRs are really only reporting on activities where you've had activity during that quarter, but this draft final QPR will show you cumulative summaries for all of your activities, for all the activities. So this is a good place to start understanding what's been entered into DRGR. Now, the draft final QPR is accessed through the DRGR reports module, or you can access it through DRGR Public. As a grantee, however, it's easier to do it through the reports module in DRGR. But if you're going to do it that way, this is the folder trail that you would use. You'd enter the reports module in DRGR. You'd click on the DRGR OLAP folder, shared reports, standard reports, grantee user reports, and then the NSP closeout reports folder. And then from there, you'd see the link for the final performance report. In addition to the draft final QPR, there are many reports in the reports module in DRGR. These are MicroStrategies reports, and they are updated daily. There are a number of kinds of reports here. You've got the admin reports, the financial reports, and the performance reports. So there are 3 categories. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the reports in each of these categories. There are many more reports in DRGR than we will talk about today, but just understand that there are 3 major categories of reports. And the information in these reports is wonderful in that inside DRGR you can do a lot of things to filter the information, to move columns, to really manipulate the information inside the system. But even better, you can export these reports as PDFs or as Excel files so that they can become even more useful to you as you manage your programs and as you confirm the data that's been inputted into DRGR over time. Okay. So before we start looking at these individual reports, just want to give a couple reminders here. So remember, again, the DRGR is a reporting system. It only knows what you've told it. So what we're trying to do here is make sure that what you've told it over time matches your internal files. So this is the process of reconciliation. So once you've pulled the reports, as we'll talk about them today, and you compare them to your internal files, if you're finding errors, then you know you need to reconcile your DRGR data and make the corrections. So there's going to be a lot more data in your files than what DRGR has, but to the extent that DRGR has data about your program, it should match what's in your files. And as part of this, you're going to need to be a detective. So you're going to be pulling these reports that we'll talk about today. You can pull others as well. We're just going to talk about some of the key ones. Pull these reports, look through the data, make sure it matches what's in your records, and what you want to do is confirm that it's both complete and accurate. So before we really dive into the nitty-gritty details and people start to get stressed out about, oh my gosh, there's so much for me to understand here, we want to remind you that if you do need assistance, there are lots of places to get assistance with DRGR. You can always submit a DRGR Ask a Question, and one of the experts on the DRGR Ask a Question pool will respond and help you answer any questions you have related to error messages you might get as you're completing your corrections, or if you're just you're not sure how to complete a function, you can submit and ask a question. If you feel like you have a little bit more of a challenge, you can contact your field office for assistance. You can always contact your field office for assistance, but with respect to DRGR, there are a number of things that are out there to help you out. So the first is on-call technical assistance. It is available for significant DRGR needs. In addition to that, as John mentioned at the start of the webinar, there are going to be some DRGR office hours that are getting launched pretty soon. Now, these hours will be by referral only from your field office, or if you're working with a TA provider who's helping you close out. They're really designed to help those that are the closest to close out clear those last remaining DRGR issues. So this is for folks who have identified problems, trouble areas in their DRGR data, but may need some assistance in completing the functions. And so this would allow you to sign up for an hour or so to talk to a DRGR expert in a pretty immediate fashion and get the one-on-one assistance that you might need to make those corrections. So if you feel like you're that person where you're really close to close out and you just have some trouble spots in DRGR and need a few hours of help, you can talk with your field office to get a referral. Now, they're not up and running yet, but they will be soon, and we'll certainly be letting you know as they are launched. Again, as I mentioned, if you've been assigned to work with a TA provider on preparing your closeout package, there's about 125 grantees who have been assigned so far and more to come. If you're one of those grantees and you feel that you would benefit from some technical assistance with DRGR, you can talk with them about that, and they'll talk with the field office as well. And just note that this cleanup can be time-consuming, and that's why we're doing this webinar today, so that you have an understanding of the kinds of cleanup that may be needed in DRGR so that you can start early. It can often take quite a bit of time to find the hours in the day to squeeze in DRGR reconciliation on top of all your other tasks, and so starting early is always a good idea. All right, so we're going to talk about a series of reports in the coming slides, and we want you to understand where you can access those reports. So again, you can access the reports through the reports module in DRGR. This would be the preferred method for grantees. All you have to do is log into DRGR, click on the reports module, and then navigate through those folders that I mentioned earlier, and you'll get to the reports. And those reports will be the most current information. They're updated daily. It's important to remember that they're updated daily, because if you do make some corrections in DRGR, those corrections may not appear or will not appear in the reports that same day. You can check back in the next day to make sure that the changes you made are there in the reports. Now, in addition to that, as I mentioned earlier, there is this DRGR public site where folks can access reports. The public, anybody, obviously, with an internet connection can access some of the key DRGR reports, particularly the ones that we're going to be talking about here today, as well as some other NSP data through the DRGR public site. Now, if you wanted to access the draft final QPR through the public site, you would click on the reports folder at this link here. If you wanted to access any of the other reports that we'd be talking about today, you would go to the data downloads section of the public portal and access them at that link there. Now, on the public portal, the draft final QPR updates about weekly, and the data downloads update daily there as well. Okay, so those are the best two ways to access your reports. But again, as a grantee, you really want to be pulling them right from inside DRGR in the reports module. Okay, so now for all the fun. We're going to talk about a series of reports today, how you look at them, what you do to understand the data in them, and then the kinds of things that are common problems within each of these reports, and a little bit of information on how you go about fixing them, mostly to just point you in the right direction. And then from there, if you do have any trouble making the corrections that might be needed, you can always go to the resources that we talked about a minute ago to get some help. And we'll recap those resources at the end of the session as well. So we're going to be looking, we did talk a little bit about the draft final QPR already, but I wanted to remind you that that is something that is helpful to look at as part of your closeout preparation. So we'll mention it again here. We'll also be looking at Admin Report 2B. This is the activity summary. Financial Report 7A. This is the financial summary, the main one that most of us use when we're trying to get a sense of how a grantee's program is performing from a financial point of view. We'll also talk about the NSP Closeout Report for meeting the LH25 expenditures. The Performance Report 01. This is a really important report as part of your closeout preparation, because this is the report that's going to reflect all the performance measures, the actual accomplished performance measures that you've entered over time in your QPR. So this is things like your income levels, your number of units, your green measures. We'll talk about addresses. We'll talk about beneficiary statistics. So this is where you've been reporting on the race, ethnicity, and female-headed household data for all of those units that met national objectives. This is the information that you were inputting in your QPR over time. And then finally, we're going to talk about support data for addresses. And the reason that this is important is because this is a screen that is a little bit newer in DRGR, and so some of the NSP1 addresses may not have always had this information entered for it, but some of the information that appears on the support data screen for addresses does correspond to the management plan for continued affordability, which is a closeout form in your closeout package. And so all of these reports that we'll be talking about today are really a way to get your DRGR data all complete and accurate so that when you close out your grant, you know you're closing out with the best data possible in the system. All right, draft final QPR. Again, we spoke about this a few minutes ago. This is where you're going to review a summary of all of your activities that you've reported on over time in your QPRs, and this will have all of your activities, not just the ones that were active in the current quarter. You might use this particularly to review your narratives, because this will give you a really good understanding of the narratives that you've entered into the QPRs over time to see where you might need to do some cleanup. Again, to access the reports, you're going to follow this folder chain that's noted here. And then I do want to point out, though, that you might want to rely on the MicroStrategies reports. Those are the reports that we're going to be talking about coming up here if you're looking at financial and performance data, because it's going to really include the most comprehensive information. It might be the easiest for helping you reconcile your internal records with what's in DRGR. All right. So we'll look at the first report, the Admin Report 2B. And this is a report that is used to review activity types and activity status. And so this report, again, is pulling information out of the action plan module. So it is a report in MicroStrategies, but all of this information is coming from your action plan module. So to the extent that there's anything you're finding in this report that isn't consistent with your program, you will likely need to make a change in the action plan module. Okay, so the first thing that we look at here in Admin Report 2B is activity types. Now, activity types that may have the type acquisition general. This is an activity type that was used often by folks when they were first starting to set up their programs, and it's not one that is likely the best activity type to be using if it does not reflect the activity's end use. So for example, if when you purchased a piece of property, you set up the activity as acquisition general type, but in the end you actually rehabbed it, then its activity type really should be rehab, reconstruction of residential structures. And the reason that's important is because having the right activity type noted will dictate the kind of accomplishment measures that you report on later. And that, in turn, helps HUD collect the best data. And so if you go and you pull Admin Report 2B and you see a lot of acquisition general activity types, you likely are going to need to change some of those to reflect the true end use. Now again, activity types are changed in the action plan module using a simple drop-down menu, but every change you make in the action plan does require HUD approval. So you'll need to submit this action plan to your HUD representative so that they can approve these changes that you make. You should also note that if you do make a change to an activity type, it may result in a need to update DRGR accomplishments in the QPR depending on the activity type that you chose. All right. So the second thing that we look at in the Admin Report 2B is the activity status. So in advance of closeout, all activities must be marked completed before the grant will be closed out. So when you submit your closeout package to HUD, once you get to that point where you've received the closeout package from HUD, you've completed all of the information that's required in the closeout package, and you're getting ready to send it back to HUD, you're going to need to have all of your activities marked as completed. And in fact, you need to speak with your HUD rep. Some of them may ask you to mark them as complete before they even send you the closeout package. It's a good idea just to check in with them. But certainly by the time you close out your grant, all of these activities will need to be marked completed. So by pulling Admin Report 2B, you can see the status of each of your activities. These activities that are marked underway, if you're still working on them, don't change it to completed until they are truly completed, because once the status is changed to complete, you'll no longer be able to work with them in DRGR. So you won't be able to receive program income or report on accomplishments or anything like that once they're marked as complete. So if you're still working on them, keep them as underway, but just understand that when you get to closeout, they will need to be marked complete. And the way to change your activity status to complete is to go into the action plan module, use the drop-down menu, and just change the activity status. And I'll show you here a screenshot that shows you what that looks like. This is a screenshot of the Edit Activity page 1 in the action plan module. And as you can see here on this Edit Activity page, you have a number of data elements, including these ones in the red boxes. One is the activity type. As you can see, it's a drop-down menu, and you can just click on that to change it to the activity type that reflects its end use. In addition to that, you have the activity status. Again, this is completed, underway, or canceled are the statuses that you can choose from here. So you would click on this drop-down if it's already marked underway and change it to completed once it's actually complete. And again, once you've made these changes, you will need to submit your action plan to your HUD rep in order to get it approved. Okay, and if you do need any help with editing activities, you can look to the DRGR user manual at section 4.2.3.1, and there's a link here to that section of the action plan, to that section of the manual. Covers all the different functions in the action plan. The manual has been just updated in the past year, and it has a lot of great step-by-step instructions along with screenshots, so I encourage everyone to look to the manual whenever you have questions, because you'll likely find some good answers there. All right. So going on to Financial Report 7A, this is a very popular report among all DRGR users because it really allows you to see at a glance the financial information for all of your projects and activities. The information in this report is listed by activity and includes items such as the budgets, the obligations, the program fund draws, the program income draws, program income receipts, and expenditures. Now, with the exception of expenditures, actually not receipts, with the exception of expenditures, all the information is pulled from the action plan module into the pulled from the action plan module and the drawdown module. So all your information on budgets is pulled right from the action plan module. All your information on draws is pulled right from the drawdown module. And as that information is pulled into the report, it populates the report. The only piece of information that is not pulled from the action plan or drawdown module in this report 7A is the expenditure data. This expenditure data is the data that you've entered over time into your QPR as you've expended funds on each of these activities. So you can also use this report in order to download it. You can download it into Excel, and you can work with it to add your own columns or manipulate the data in another way if you are trying to combine it with information that you may already have on hand. So the way we'd like you to use this report, Financial Report 7A, is to look at it to assess whether you've spent all of your line of credit. Those are your program funds. Have you spent them all? Do you have any left? If you still have line of credit funds left, you would not be able to close out unless you've decided that you no longer want those funds and you're okay with having them swept back to Treasury. But in order to close out, you likely would like your line of credit, your program funds, to be 0. You also want to use this report to confirm that you've spent no more than 10% on admin costs. So you would look at your admin activities and see the total that you've spent on it and make sure that it's no more than 10% of your grant plus PI. You also want to look at this report to see how much has been receipted, drawn, and remains on hand in program income. As you know, recently the program income transfer notice has come out, and so this is another report that might be helpful as you try to assess how much money is on hand if you're one of the grantees who are interested in transferring program income. And you're also looking at this report again to see whether all funds have been reported as expended to the extent you've expended them. Again, this is that one piece of information that you do enter quarterly, the expenditures, and so if it's not correct in this report, it means that you need to do a reconciliation in your QPR. And so if you do need to make corrections to the expenditure amounts, then you'd go into your QPR and you'd make any corrections in the current quarter's QPR. Again, we're not going back to try to figure out where we made the mistake. We're just making all the corrections in the current quarter. As you can see here from this little screenshot, there is a little box right down here at the bottom where you actually enter the amount of the expenditures for that quarter. If you need any help with this, you can go to the DRGR manual at section 6.222, and there's some information on making these corrections. All right, next report. So the next report we're going to talk about is the NSP Closeout LH25 report. Now this report provides a summary of expenditures on LH25 activities at the grant level. So this is going to help you assess whether you've met the LH25 requirement at your grant level. To access this report, you're going to follow this folder chain here, which is basically going into that NSP Closeout report folder that we talked about before, and then you're going to click on the NSP Closeout LH25 report. Something to note here is that this report is based on expenditures, and as we talked about before, expenditures are something that the grantee is entering over time, and so if you have not reconciled your expenditures and you have an error there, then there may be an error in this report as well. So this is a report that is based on expenditures. You want to make sure you've gotten your expenditures right, and then you can confidently rely on this report to make sure that you've met your LH25 requirement. There's another way that you can go about looking at what you've drawn for LH25 activities, and you can use Financial Report 7A that we just talked about, and you can manipulate it to add a couple more columns, and it'll easily help you calculate what you've spent on LH25 activities. So basically, you would just download, export the export the Financial Report 7A into Excel. And once you have it exported, you can create a column that calculates all of the disbursements. So there is already a column for program funds dispersed and one for program income dispersed. You can add a column that sums both of those, and then you have a column for all of your total funds dispersed. Once you have those total funds dispersed for each individual activity, you can do a sum to get the total dispersed for all of your LH25 activities, because the national objectives will be noted there. And then from there, you can compare that to the amount needed to meet your 25% set aside. So that's just another tip on how you can use these reports to help you out in assessing where you are with meeting the closeout requirements. And as we all know, meeting the LH25 requirement for all of our activities in which we've spent line of credit funds is one of the criteria for closeout. All right. So what if you do this work, you pull this expenditure report, or you look at your draws and you see that you have not met the 25% set-aside requirement? Well, what you might want to do then is review all of your LMMI activities to see if there happened to have been any beneficiaries that were miscategorized. So perhaps you had a home and it was already set up in DRGR to be funded under an LMMI activity. And luckily, you actually ended up selling that home to someone who qualified under the LH25 category. If that happened, you can easily, you can move those expenditures and accomplishment data over into the LH25 activity and get credit for it. Now, in order to do that, moving units from LMMI to LH25 activities may require a number of steps. You might possibly have to set up a new activity depending on how your action plan is already set up, but perhaps it might just require moving information to an existing activity. You'll have to take a closer look on a case-by-case basis. You might have to adjust budgets in the action plan or obligations in the drawdown module and revise vouchers in the drawdown module, and you may have to adjust beneficiary data. So it's not terribly complicated, but there is some sequencing that does need to happen in terms of when you do the steps in what order. And so if you need assistance with this, this is a really great place to talk to your HUD representative, submit and ask a question, and refer to the DRGR manual. So there's a number of places in the DRGR manual that would help you here, including the action plan, drawdown, and QPR sections. And so that's just a few tips if you discover that some of your units that are listed under an LMMI activity are actually LH25. Okay, next report is the Performance Report 01. These are the performance measures such as income, units, and green measures. And this report is pulling information from the QPR data that you have entered over time. So each quarter you go in, you report on those units that have met a national objective, and you report on any green measures associated with those units. That information that you've entered each quarter is pulled into this report in a cumulative fashion. And so the purpose of looking at this report is to confirm that the performance measures are being reported completely and accurately so that they match your own records. And you want to check to see if there are any activities with no information that have been reported, or where the number of accomplishments reported is inconsistent with your records, or perhaps where you've reported on activities where you haven't actually met a national objective yet. So this is an example of what this report looks like. As you can see here, the information is broken out by activity number and activity type, and then you have your different measures. So you have things like your households, the green measures, and then you also have whether these were for lower mod or under the total column of units. And we're going to talk in a minute about the difference between the low, mod, and total. Okay. So some helpful resources, if you do have any reconciliation to make here, include the DRGR manual at section 6.2.2.4. And there's also a really handy tool called the prior period corrections tool. There are some fact sheets associated with this tool, and they're here at this link. But if you just go into Google and search prior period corrections for DRGR, you'll get the page. It's going to show you all of your fact sheets related to prior period corrections and tools. And so this is something that you can use if you do find some errors, but you're having a hard time sort of parsing out where the changes are that you need to make. And so here's a screenshot of what this tool looks like. The tool is an Excel file, and the way it's set up is to have 3 parts, step A, B, and C. Step A is where you're going to identify and enter totals from your own data tracking systems, your internal records. Step B is where you're going to pull the data from DRGR using the reports to enter the information that DRGR has. So this is the information that's been reported over time. And to the extent that there's any inconsistencies, step C is going to identify the exact number that you need to enter into your QPR to make the change. So let's look down here under female-headed households at the very bottom of the page in the blue boxes. For this grantee, you can see that their records show that they have 27 female-headed households for this activity. When they pulled the reports in DRGR, however, they show 29 female-headed households. So that's the difference between their own records, step A, and the DRGR records, step B. Step C in the spreadsheet will automatically calculate the number that you need to enter in order to reconcile your records with DRGR, and that's a -2. Now, this is an extremely simple example, of course. You wouldn't really need to use a tool to figure out that you need to put in a -2, but this is just to show you a simple way that this tool works. And it becomes particularly useful when you start trying to reconcile the races. The reports on races can get a little bit cumbersome to look at because there's so many columns, and sometimes the data is a little hard to parse out. And so using this to reconcile the races can be really, really helpful. This is also just a reminder that you can use negative numbers when you're reconciling your accomplishments in DRGR, so you can enter positive or negative numbers if needed. So let's talk a little bit about the kinds of measures that you might have to reconcile that appear in this performance report 01. So this is a common one that we see that needs to be reconciled among many grantees. So green measures were required for NSP2 and NSP3 grantees. So if you're an NSP1 grantee, you were not required to report on green measures. But if you're an NSP2 or NSP3 grantee, you were required to report on green measures. And we found that a lot of folks either didn't understand this or maybe it just got lost along the way, but they have not been reporting on green measures. So when you pull your performance report 01, if you do not see any green measures there, then you're an NSP2 or 3 grantee, then you're going to need to do some reconciliation. Now, you're going to need to reconcile here if you've not reported them, like I just mentioned, or if they've been reported incorrectly. So except for some standards on multifamily buildings under NSP2, there were no requirements as to the specific kinds of green features that you needed to include in your programs, but you needed to include some, and they needed to be reported. And so that's why it's important to pull Performance Report 01. Okay, so what do I do if I'm seeing that I haven't reported on my green measures? Well, if you have data fields for green measures in your Edit QPR screens, but you just haven't reported on them in your QPRs, you have all zeros in your Performance Report 01, then in this quarter's current QPR, you would just report all your green measures. So if you did low-flow toilets, you would report all the numbers for your low-flow toilets where you've met a national objective on those units. And then that would solve your problem. However, if you're in your QPR and you're on your Edit QPR screens and you don't even have the field to report on green measures, then you're going to have to do a little bit of extra work. Because the reason you're not seeing the fields for the green measures in your QPR screen is because you never put in a proposed measures in your action plan. And so remember I said a little while ago that the action plan is really the foundation of everything that happens in DRGR. So all of the places in your action plan where you put a proposed measure will show up in your QPR so that you can report on an actual. If you didn't put that you were going to do 10 low-flow toilets for an activity, you'll never get that data field to report on in the QPR. So what you'll need to do is go back into your QPR, into your action plan, put in the number for the proposed accomplishment, and then when you go into your QPR, you will see the blank there so that you can actually report on the actual accomplishments. And again, if you're going to be making a change to your action plan, you'll have to submit that to HUD for approval. But here are some information that you can use to help you do these changes in the action plan module. That's section 4.2.3.1, and then the QPR correction section at 6.2.2.4. And again, once you do have this set up correctly, then you can report on all of those accomplishments in the current quarter QPR, of course, where you've met a national objective. All right. So here's another thing that you can use Performance Report 01 to do, and this is to double check on your income reporting. So if you are a grantee that has served households between 80 to 120% AMI, that's that middle income category, then you'll want to make sure that you've reported on them correctly. In DRGR, all of these middle income folks are just reported in the total column. There's not a separate column to report on middle incomes. So you've got a column to report on low income, and you've got a column to report on moderate income. All of your middles are actually just captured in the total column. So for example, we'll show you the screen here, what it looks like when you're actually doing your reporting in DRGR. Say you have, in the past, you've reported, you pull your performance report 01, and it shows that you've reported 5 low-income households and 5 moderate-income households. But you know, after looking at your own internal records, that actually 2 of those moderates should have been reported as a middle income. So the way DRGR works is that what you should have done when you first entered the data was to put a 5 for low, a 3 for moderate, and then a 10 for the total. So you would have had 5, 3, and then 10 total, and then DRGR knows that those extra 2 are really middle income. And so if you've made the mistake over time where you've just globbed all the middles and the moderates into the moderate category, all you really have to do is to go into your current quarter QPR and put in some negative numbers here to subtract out the middles from the moderates, or if you did happen to stick them in the lows, subtract them out there, and then DRGR will know that the total is still correct and it's 10, but they'll just know that those extras fall into the middle category. And again, this can be a little bit confusing sometimes, but just know that there's help out there. You can submit and ask a question. You can talk to your HUD rep to get some help in reconciling this piece. But if you have used middle, just make sure that your Performance Report 01 accurately reflects just low in the low column, just moderate in the moderate column, and then all those middles would be captured in the total. Okay, moving on to the next performance report. This is Performance Report 6. Again, this is the beneficiary statistics report where we're going to see information reported on race, ethnicity, and female-headed households. And this report can be a little bit cumbersome. It's quite long because of the number of races, but if you pull it down in Excel, you can manipulate it a little bit easier. This information does come from the QPR module, and this is where you've entered that information over time. It gets summarized here in Performance Report 6. Much like Performance Report 1, the purpose of looking at this report is to confirm that you've reported all these measures completely and accurately, and you want to check this report against your internal records to make sure everything matches. In addition to just making sure that you have reported consistently and accurately and correctly, you want to make sure that you've actually reported on all the proper race data. Occasionally, I'll see some reports where there's an awful lot of unknown data or maybe 0 female-headed households, and that always is sort of a red flag for me because it's not likely that you really didn't know any of the races or that there wasn't a single female-headed household. So if that's a place where you might look at your reports, and if you see something that looks a little bit strange and you're not the one who's always been reporting on this data, you may want to go back into your files, or you should go back into your files anyway and do the reconciliation. But those are just a tip for where you might catch some errors. But for all of these reports, you're making sure that they match what you have in your internal files. And again, reconciliation resources, same as for Performance Report 01, but just to remind you that the DRGR manual has a great section on quarterly performance reports and how to make changes to them. And we have the prior period corrections tool that is helpful for you in this report, in making changes to reconcile this report as well. All right, addresses. So all information in this report is pulled from the information that you've entered in the QPR. Now, the addresses in the QPR are not linked to individual beneficiaries. Some people get confused about that sometimes. So you're not saying that the person at address 123 Main Street is one of the low-income beneficiaries. You're just saying the person at 123 Main Street, the house at 123 Main Street falls under this activity. So addresses are linked to activities, not to individual beneficiaries themselves. But if you have reported on a beneficiary, you should have also reported on the address. They may not be linked up in DRGR, but you should have reported on both. Again, you're only reporting on addresses when they meet a national objective for that unit. So you're going to use this report to check for any duplications. You're going to check for addresses that appear under multiple activities or the wrong activity. And you're going to check for missing addresses as well. So for addresses that appear under multiple activities, this happens pretty frequently. You're going to look to figure out why this error may be happening. If the address is there under multiple activities because it was a mistake, it accidentally got entered twice under 2 different activities, you can always delete it using the maintain address function from the incorrect activity. Often, however, we see that an address is listed under multiple activities because the way that the grantee set up their action plan was to separate out the different pieces of an activity. So perhaps they set up their action plan to have part of the overall effort be acquisition activity, and they reported it there. And then they set up a rehab, and they reported it there. In most cases, HUD's not going to ask you to go back and undo the structure of your activities. This is a place where you talk to your HUD representative about it, but there is a function in DRGR where you can actually associate activities. And by associating activities, you're telling HUD this acquisition activity matches the units in this rehab activity. And then they know just not to double count those units, and so that the duplication in the addresses won't be a problem. So if that's your case and you have multiple activities with the same addresses because you set up your activities that way in your action plan, you just want to talk with your HUD rep to explain the situation and see what they'd like you to do. Most likely you would go into the action plan module and associate the activities. And there is help for that at section 4.2.3.2 of the DRGR manual. So if you are making corrections to add, delete, or move addresses within DRGR, you're going to be using the maintain address feature. Again, there is a section of the DRGR manual at 6.2.5 that can help you with how to do this. But this is a simple screenshot that just shows here we are in the Add Edit QPR screen of the QPR module, and there's going to be a link that says Maintain Addresses there in that red box. When you click on that link, you're going to get a screen that looks like this. And from this screen, if you have failed to enter address and you just need to enter a few addresses, you can click on the Add Address link, and that's going to pop up, and you can fill that in. If you need to edit one because you have a misspelling, you can do that here. If you need to delete it because it was in the wrong place and just duplicated, for something like that, you can delete it, or if you need to move it because it just was put into the wrong activity but not duplicated in the right one, you can move it over. And you could, so this is just a quick screenshot to show you about maintaining addresses, but again, there's more help in the DRGR manual. If you have significant address problems, say you've been going on all along in your program and you've hardly entered any addresses and somehow that wasn't caught along the way, there is a way to do a data upload. And the data upload allows you to complete a template that's been created by HUD. They are CSV files. You want to keep the template exactly the way it is except for inserting the data. And you can use that data upload template to upload many addresses at once. Just keep in mind that this is adding addresses to DRGR. It's not overwriting anything. And so if you've already gotten, if you already have 20 addresses in there and you still need to add 50, don't put the 20 that are already in there on your spreadsheet or they'll be duplicated. In some cases, you may need to actually just delete all the addresses that are in DRGR. If you have significant address problems and you want to use this data upload, it may be easier just to get rid of everything in there and re-upload all of your addresses nice, fresh, and clean. Again, this is something you always want to talk to your HUD rep about, but it is a tool that's out there if you have significant cleanup that you need to do, or if you have significant reporting that you haven't done in the past. The data upload templates are very helpful. There is a data upload template for nearly every function in DRGR. Each module in DRGR has some kind of data upload template that can be helpful to you as you're adding and correcting information in the system. So this link here shows you a place on the Resource Exchange where you can get the fact sheet related to the data uploads, so how you do them, as well as the data upload template. The data upload templates are also available inside, just right inside DRGR. When you go to the data upload screen, you can click on a link to get the templates from there. And if you go to the DRGR manual at section 9, there's a whole section there that walks you through how you do the data uploads. And it's, again, another really great tip as you're getting ready for closeout. If you see that you're missing a lot of information in DRGR, this is one way to get it in there really quickly. All right, and our final report that we're going to talk about here is another report related to addresses, but a little bit different. So the report, Performance Report 03, is just showing you addresses, showing you the activity and the address that's related to it. It's not giving you the supporting information on the address. Now, the supporting information on the address is it's some information that wasn't always required as part of the addresses. And so some of the earlier addresses that were entered may not have it. But in order to get the report to find out if your addresses have their supporting information, you would go into the reports module, navigate through that shared reports, standard reports, grantee user reports thread, get to the NSP Closeout reports folder. So this isn't going to be one of those admin, financial, or performance reports. This is separately in the NSP Closeout reports folder, and you're going to look for the support data for addresses report. And when you pull that report, you're going to see a bunch of information there. And I'll show you that in, actually, it's going to look like this. All the different fields for information on that report correspond to this field, which is a screen in DRGR. Okay, so you've pulled the support data for addresses report, and you found that you have not entered supporting data for many of your addresses. Let's assume that's happened. When you go into the maintain address function in DRGR, when you click on that maintain address link, like we showed you a little while ago, you get your list of addresses here. The same screen that we showed you before where you can edit, delete, and move addresses. At the end of each address, you're going to see a link that says enter data. When you click on that enter data link, you're going to get this screen. And so this is the screen that you would fill out for all of those addresses to enter the data listed here. Anything with an asterisk is required. But I will say that these fields here in the red boxes are really important to complete because they correspond to information on one of the closeout forms. And so the closeout form called the Management Plan for Continued Affordability, that form requires you to report on the start and end date of the affordability period for each and every address. It also requires you to enter the affordability method for each and every address. So is it resale, recapture, rental, is it something else? And so that management plan for continued affordability is going to be required as part of your closeout package. If you've already completed all this information in DRGR, you can pull this support data for addresses report, and you can use this as part of that plan and just basically attach it. There's still a signature you have to put on the form, but you can use this report to help you quickly complete that form once you've entered all this information. And so again, in order to enter this information in DRGR, you'd be going to the Maintain Address function. Once you click on Maintain Addresses in your QPR, you're going to get this screen, and for each address that you've entered, you would click Enter Data, and you can add the data. Now, as you're adding a new address, you can click Add Address up here, and you can add that data as you go along. So that's one way to do it. You can just go into Maintain Addresses for each address and add the data. Again, there are data uploads that are available to add this information, but again, these are adding addresses, and so if you already have the address in DRGR, it's going to add the address again, and you'd have to go in and delete the other ones that you've already entered. So in some cases, it might be easier just to wipe out everything and use this data upload for additional information to populate all of the address fields. So again, some of this can get a little bit confusing. If you are unsure of how to complete the functions, there are many resources out there, but this really is just some guidance to help you understand what you need to be looking for in terms of cleaning things up. You might not necessarily know how to do it, but now you know that one of the things to look for is to make sure that your addresses have the supporting data. All right, and this goes to talk about the template. Again, the template for supporting information does add the address to DRGR, so if it's already in there, then you're going to have two. So you'll need to do some deleting. All right, resources. So there are lots of resources, as I've noted before. On the HUD Resource Exchange, there's lots of NSP information, task policy guidance. Also, the NSP closeout guidance is there. And there are many, many webinars that you can search for if you need help, including many, many DRGR webinars. So there are webinars on many different topics, things that we covered here today, actual step-by-step guidance. If you go into the webinars, you can search for DRGR and you'll find lots of resources there. In addition to that, there is the Ask a Question for NSP and for DRGR. There are two different pools, so if you have a policy question, you can ask your policy questions in the NSP pool. If you have a technical question related to making corrections or errors that you're getting in DRGR, you can submit a question to the DRGR section. And the NSP questions mailbox. This is sort of a relaunched mailbox from the early days of NSP. And I don't know, Larry, did you want to say a few words about the NSP mailbox?
No, just that Jerry, I, and John every once in a while are responding to questions. We try to get a response within 12 to 24, no longer than 48 hours.
Okay.
The mailbox address, nsp-questions@hud.gov, it is not right now on the HUD Exchange. We're trying to get that loaded up on the HUD Exchange so you can access there also.
Okay, great. That's wonderful. And then, of course, there are TA requests. So, of course, you want to talk with your field office representative if you're really struggling with some of this DRGR cleanup. You might want to check in with them. Again, this webinar really was geared towards helping you use the reports to identify errors that exist in your system. It doesn't necessarily mean you know how to fix them at this point, right? And so, if you don't know how to fix them, these are the resources that you can use. You can pull up some of the written guidance, you can submit and ask a question, you can ask for TA help. And here are some of the direct links to the specific DRGR resources like the user manual. Again, you can download the user manual as one big chunk, or there are links for individual sections like the action plan module, drawdown module, QPR module for each module. And then you've got your Ask a Question link there. As we've mentioned previously, the DRGR office hours are coming. So if you're one of those folks who are real close to closeout and you just need to get this DRGR cleaned up, and if you just had a few hours of help, you think you could really knock it out, then these DRGR office hours are really for you. And so that's going to be coming soon, and you can ask your field office rep about it. Another really helpful tool that I'm not sure everybody knows about is the DRGR frequently asked questions. You can search them on the HUD Resource Exchange, so if you click on this link here, you'll get a box that pops up. There's a search function, and you can search there. But when you're in DRGR, if you're stuck and you're not sure how to do something, down here on the left-hand side of the screen near the bottom, you're going to see this FAQ link. If you click on that, you can search for things like, how do I enter expenditures? And then more than likely it's a frequently asked question, and it'll pop up and it'll give you an answer. So the FAQs is like a nice little, a quick go-to to try to find an answer when you need it fast, and you can access it right from inside the system. So because we've been all talking about DRGR today, we just wanted to remind you what to do if you get stuck technically trying to get into the system. If you need a password reset or the system is down and you need to talk to somebody about it, you're going to call the HITS help desk at this number here, selecting option 9, and just be ready to provide your user ID and your PIN, and they will help you reset your password. If you have locked yourself out of DRGR because you let your session open without any activity for more than 20 minutes, or you closed your browser and didn't forget to log out, you should wait 30 minutes. Within 30 minutes, your session should reset. If it does not reset, then you know that you're probably going to need a little bit more assistance if you've already waited more than 30 minutes. In order to get that help, you would send an email to drgr_help@hud.gov, and in the subject line, just make sure to put session reset, and then put your user ID in the body of the email, and somebody will get back to you, and you'll get your session reset, and you'll be able to get back into DRGR to make all these corrections. All right. So with that, I will open it up for questions. I know that this is a lot of information to cover, and you're all probably still digesting it, but if you have some questions, we are happy to take them now. All right, so I'm looking through some of the questions here, and it says, do subrecipients have access to technical assistance or just the grantees?
This is Jesse. The grantee is the one that has the relationship with HUD and can ask for TA. A subrecipient can go online and search all the HUD Exchange resources, but if a subrecipient asks for TA, we will probably double back to the grantee and see what the deal is, because the subrecipient has a contractual relationship not with us. If it's an easy question, we'll just answer it or point them in the right direction, but if they're asking you something about the grantees program, we have to go back to the grantee. So our main push and the statutory reason we have the money is to provide assistance to grantees for the TA resources, but we do occasionally help the subrecipient out, but typically policy is to steer them back to the grantee first.
Thank you. Excuse me. Okay.
You gonna make it?
Yep, I'm gonna make it. All right. Next question. The next question is, let's see, we've got a lot of questions we already answered about technical things here. Once we mark an activity completed, do we put the date we mark complete, or do we put the date we met the program objective?
Typically, the answer is kind of neither. You may meet a national objective for a project before you, for example, make a final payment on a mechanics lien or something like that, or make your final draw because you had activity delivery costs at the grantee level or subrecipient level. It's you make it when the date we prefer is the date that you met a national objective and there's not going to be any more activity on that particular activity. You can just walk away from it and you pull the toggle and mark it, completed in DRGR. That's the date we're looking for. It isn't uncommon, however, for it to be the date that you mark it completed. Whatever you do, be consistent and make sure your rep agrees with it. I mean, if you think of the last action on that grant, on that activity, the way you think about it is that last action on your checklist of things is to change it to completed, then you can use that date if you want. Our preferred date is the actual, completion when you're done working on that activity and all payments have been made, all obligations met.
Great, thank you. Okay, a question asks, is it possible that at one time you met the 25% requirement, however, due to additional program income, the requirement is no longer met?
Yep, the requirement is to meet the 25% set aside at closeout. So, yeah, that can happen.
Okay, great. This question asks, if you enter the date in the completed activity end date box in more than one QPR reporting period for an activity, does this create a problem in the final performance report? I'll read that one again. If you enter the date in the completed activity end date box in more than one QPR reporting period for an individual activity, does this create a problem in the final performance report?
I suspect it does, but I don't know for sure. I think you should really only be entering that date when you're actually completed and not do it again.
Yeah, I would agree.
If you're overwriting it because you're correcting it because there was something else, which isn't impossible in a construction program by any means, then you might not have a problem. This system is probably always going to take the last QPR, but it might create a problem in the report because I don't know exactly what the report's pulling. You should pull the report yourself after you do it. Go in the next day and double check.
Yeah, that's a good idea. It's a really good idea. Yeah, it's always a good idea to double check when you've made these changes just to make sure that they stick. A lot of times folks think they completed an action and they forgot to press save and it doesn't stick if you don't press save. So always make sure you go in the next day and just pull the report to make sure all the changes you made are there.
Yeah. You can also, the same day, you can go to I forget, the view version, I guess.
Yeah.
And you can see what it will look like tomorrow, basically. I forget which version it is. You can pull them both because one of them is still going to look like yesterday's, and then the next one will show your changes. There's a couple of different options when you look at your QPR. The data entry screens will still show what you entered on the same day. It's just the reports that take a day for DRGR to pass it across to MicroStrategy, which is the add-on that does the reports.
Great. Okay, great. When you're reconciling, will you have to go back to the individual activity listings in case there are duplicates, like in the female-headed household example, or do you just adjust the numbers in the tool that's provided? And so, yes, that tool is just a tool. It's a spreadsheet. So once you get the numbers from that spreadsheet, you do have to go back into DRGR and actually go into the individual activity in your QPR and make that change in the QPR in DRGR.
But this also might be a question that could be solved if you've already entered the double. Maybe could be solved with the associated activities. You have multiple activities that have the same household reported. So that one would be one where you'd want to pull the report and sort of map out exactly what you had to do.
Yeah.
But we put associated activities in because it's not uncommon, for example, for a grantee to purchase a piece of property, pass it across to a subrecipient, transfer it to a sub who then does the rehab. And because of the change in the responsible organization, it's actually literally two activities.
Okay. All right. On slide 40, they say, when going to maintain and putting in addresses and clicking at the bottom to validate or any of the other choices, yellow exclamation points continue to come up and nothing validates why. They say they are using Internet Explorer, and that's a good thing. The one thing you might want to check is that it's good that you're using Internet Explorer, but make sure that you are working in compatibility view mode. DRGR actually works best in IE 8, and we are now at IE 11. And so working in compatibility mode fixes that problem. You can easily Google compatibility mode view, and it'll show you exactly. It's like just a couple clicks just to get you set up in that mode. So make sure you're in that compatibility mode first, and then if you're still having problems with the validate feature, the validate feature really is just a tool. It's not required that it comes up 100%. It's to help you double check that you've entered the address correctly. And so when you click on that validate button, if you get an error, sometimes there are errors that come up if it happens to be a new street or a new development or something like that. Other reasons, not really sure. Maybe Jesse knows why we might get an error for some other reasons, but it's just a tool. So.
Yeah, I mean, there's sometimes some areas just, oddly enough, aren't mapped yet. We've discovered that the hard way, and NSP has been leading the way, pointing that out for us. But it can't hurt if you like can go on Google Maps or MapQuest or whatever Apple's mapping program is, and you can find that address no problem. We should also find it no problem. If one or two of those are having problems, then that's probably us also having that problem. But if they all work, then you can call that into the put a question in for the DRGR help desk, and because you might have a computer problem and not a mapping problem.
Yeah. Yes, that's good. Okay. Say, can you review the frequency with which the reports refresh with new data? Yes, it's every day. Every day, in the morning, overnight. What's that?
Overnight. It usually seems to happen around 9 p.m. if you're in the system around 9 p.m. Eastern. Sometimes you get some hiccups. That's how I know. Because sometimes our East Coast people tell us about it. I mean, our West Coast people tell the East Coast about it.
Okay. Great. That's good to know. I was never sure exactly which time.
It just seems to be right around then. I don't think it's particularly scheduled. It's in a waterfall of other programs that also make contact and swap data overnight.
Excellent.
Like
someone asks, if you miss submitting a QPR, do we need to go back and try to recreate that QPR?
Almost certainly your rep is going to ask you to do that. There are a number of reasons to do that. What I don't know is what happens if the system's capable of interpolating the obligated amount. Might give it a little fit right there. But yeah, we want you to have an unbroken series of QPRs representing your program. Your rep may ask you to do just a really streamlined one if there's one missed, but technically completely missing a QPR is a finding that should be corrected by doing the QPR. The one thing I wanted to mention, by the way, one of the reasons we're validating the addresses is because the addresses in DRGR are actually passed across to the Econ Planning Suite, and the individual addresses may be masked. They may appear masked, but they're part of the data that you can play with in doing your next consolidated plan, especially if you're working in a target area or something. So, and they're also used by researchers who are researching whether NSP was a successful program or not. So it is data that gets used. It's not used for anything. And of course, we use it for monitoring to verify that the units exist and that there are people in them. People have been asking me a lot about why we collect all this. And it's multiple. It's
helpful to know.
Yeah. But it feeds back to the grantee. If you have those maps, you can use them as data yourself when you do your next plan. That can be useful.
Definitely. This person is saying that their LH25 report does not pull up any data. Is this a question for a TA or ask a question?
Well, they should pull their, they should go into their QPR first. the view QPR and see if the QPR is calculating. There's a PDF version of the QPR. I forget whether it's view or see if it's calculating the 25%. If the report doesn't show it, then, you know, if the QPR shows it, the last QPR shows it, but the report doesn't, then that's a technical problem on us. But you should also, you know, step through your activities and make sure you did accept, you know, set the LH25 for some activities, and that you actually have the expenditures reported and the accomplishments there. Because if you have not been reporting expenditures, remember, we're sticklers about accounting definitions. We, in DRGR, drawdowns, your draws are not expenditures. Your reported expenditures are expenditures. And so the LH25 is calculated off expenditures. If you haven't been reporting them regularly on your LH25 activities, you can end up with it saying that you haven't met the requirement when you believe that you have. You have to report expenditures. So we have all the fields: budgeted, obligated, drawn in process, and expended.
Thank you.
That's how we got you out of the SF425.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not a small thing. We crunched 2 quarterly reports into one.
Yeah. Okay. This person asked, is the draft final QPR the latest QPR, or does the grantee actually have to create the draft final QPR?
It's a thing that'll exist. It'll pull when you go to pull it, and it draws from all those modules that you pointed out.
Yep. So it's DRGR will create it for you. You just have to pull it down from DRGR. You don't have to do anything more than click a few buttons. All right. And
but you have to be completing your QPRs all along.
Right. Yes, good point. Yes, you have to have completed your QPRs in order for that information to show up in the draft final, because it's really just a cumulative of all the work you've done over time.
Right, it shows every activity, whereas during a QPR, you just report on the ones that had activity in that quarter. And it's standing in there to answer the regulation and the federal financial requirements that say that the final report for a grant has to summarize all activity under the grant. So we created it in DRGR. If you've been reporting all along, you just pull it, look at it, go, that's right, and turn it in.
Yeah. Okay. And so it says, am I able to print out beneficiary data for each unit from the performance report 6? Is there a search function by address or by project number? We are one of the ones that were told by our local HUD office to set one address up as 3 separate activities. And so there's a number of questions. So am I able to print out beneficiary data for each unit from the performance report 6? So the answer to that is no, not really. So you can't correspond the beneficiary data to the address. So you can't pull a list of addresses and then see that in that unit there is a low-income Asian household that's female-headed. You won't be able to see that by address.
And just so people know, that is on purpose. I know it's not perfect that if it was a case management system, it would serve a lot of needs, but DRGR would have to have much stronger privacy security that we don't have. And so by not linking the address to the race and ethnicity information and collecting race and ethnicity information in aggregate, we avoid the privacy concerns.
Yes, exactly. And so the next part of the question is there a search function by address or by project number? And I think she's referring back to how to access the beneficiary data. So the answer to that would be no. You can search for addresses, but it's just going to be a list of addresses. It won't have that confidential information associated with them.
But you can get address by activity.
Yep, absolutely.
And that can get you the step closer, because you can see for each activity the summary demographic data for that activity. And most grantees are aggregating their single-family housing, but not all of them. But it's not a case management system like eSNAPS, for example, is.
Okay, and then, so she said she's one of the grantees that were told by the field office to set up one address as 3 separate activities. So you may be a good candidate for associating your activities so that it's clear that all of those beneficiaries are related and not duplicate.
Yeah, just report the accomplishments in one of them.
Yeah, so when you associate activities, you'll choose one of the activities as the primary, and then all of your beneficiary data can be just reported into the primary.
And typically you can tell which one's primary by what we call it in short. So if we say rehab, but you actually are doing acquisition, rehabilitation, disposition, but we call it rehab, and you've set up 3 activities for it, you still know that rehab is the one where you report because we call it rehab. You know, land banking can have acquisition and disposition, but we call it land banking. So you pick disposition. So things like that. I mean, there's no hard and fast rules. What we want is for your files to tell a story, your reporting to tell a story. And so whatever you do, try to be consistent and stay in contact with your field rep or with in NSP questions or to ask a question. Don't pick one thing for one activity and one thing for a different activity. That'll make everybody lose their minds and very, very hard to understand.
Yeah, consistency is key. Okay. Someone asks, we have a home buyer loan program that receives monthly payments as program income. How will we complete the activity before closeout since loan payments will continue? And so what I've heard, and Jesse, you can chime in, but what I've heard is that you want to keep it open as long as you can, but when you get to the point where you have to close out your grant, and you're going to obviously be talking to your field office rep about this, you will mark it completed. You will mark the activity completed at the time you need to close out your grant, but you will set up a new activity in DRGR that is marked as post-closeout, and then you will continue to receipt your PI into that activity.
Or you will, I mean, we're hearing everybody loud and clear that they don't want to just transfer program income on hand to CDBG. They want to be able to transfer future streams as well to CDBG, and we're working on that. We have not been able to solve it. We've talked about it in the last webinar. And we've been advised by our lawyers we may have to go out with another program notice to pull this off, which is thrilling. We all love program notices and desperately want to do another one. But it's going to say like one thing. The answer is going to be yes, we'll make that work. So yeah, I mean, you are completed and you're just collecting loan funds. So we do have some grantees who have flagged those completed with a note that there will continue to be payments. But they didn't pull the completed toggle in DRGR because then they couldn't receive funds. And at closeout, we'll do what you said, you know, create the activity that can catch the funds if they decide to keep it in NSP.
Yeah, exactly. Good clarification on the folks who may want to be transferring. All right. Okay. All right. Does the LA25 requirement automatically adjust as PI is reported into the QPR? So the LH25 requirement is something that it's not necessarily stated in DRGR or in the QPR, like you must meet this amount. So it's automatically adjusting in that you're going to have to recalculate it as you earn more program income, but you're not going to see it listed anywhere where it's automatically adjusting. I'm not sure that we have all the information to answer your question here.
But the report will tell you if you're at 25% of grant and 25% of program income and reported expenditures. So that's where you have to be at, 25% of your grant amount plus 25% of your recorded program income, pre-closeout. Post-closeout gets a little more confusing.
Yeah. Okay. Can you provide examples of green requirements for NSP3 rehab that should be considered when reporting in the QPR?
Well, you gave the one, the low-flow toilets. There's a list of them on the rehab activity that show up and volunteer when you go to set up an activity in the action plan. And the notice lays out several of them, but they include the Energy Star appliances. They include using
Windows.
The really popular one for NSP2 anyway was the low maintenance, low water use landscaping.
Okay.
Because landscaping got you curb appeal and it was green. There's stuff for light fixtures and HVAC, and there's a number of things.
Windows.
Windows.
Yeah.
Right.
And they were strongly encouraged, but except for Energy Star appliances are not mandatory in NSP1. NSP3 we went a little further, but I think we're still soft. NSP2 you competed, and you said you would do certain things as part of the competition, so those you do need to report on, whatever you promised. But, most people, like in the West, for example, we saw almost everybody say they were going to do low-flow toilets and low-flow shower heads, and we haven't necessarily seen the low-flow water fixtures reported on. And you might think it's silly, but you can actually use those counts to calculate how much less water the NSP buildings are using. And we actually have researchers who play around with that data because it affects what housing costs low and moderate and middle income people to run, as well as being, environmentally sound practice. Anything to get those running costs down, while still keeping people comfortable.
Okay. As a follow-up to a previous question, what do you do if you no longer meet the 25% set-aside requirement because of earning additional program income?
Well, there's a couple things you do. One is you could transfer the program income to the CDBG program and then you meet it. The other is that you probably need to have a talk to your field rep, and you look at what other program income you may be receiving and figure out how you can do one more unit or however much program income you have and figure that out. And they can consult with us. We have some ideas and we have some examples.
Could use CDBG funds too.
Yeah, you can add to CDBG funds or add it to a home project. There are ways to deal with it, but it's going to depend on individual circumstances. And you never met it if you don't meet it at closeout. You haven't met it yet.
Okay.
So anybody who hasn't closed out hasn't met it yet.
All right, so let me just clarify one thing that Jesse just mentioned. So by transferring your program income to the CDBG program, that is unencumbered program income, and so it can be transferred over, and then it never has, it doesn't carry the 25% requirement with it. But if you've got program income that you've committed to projects or expended, then that plus the expended line of credit funds is the base that you're calculating your 25% from. So, if you haven't met it and you don't have any more program income, then you need to talk to your rep or start looking at your CDBG or home programs for some support.
Okay, great. Someone asked, is there a report that shows each draw ever done over time? And the answer is yes. There are lots of financial reports in the financial report section in the reports module, and there are reports that show all of your vouchers, the voucher line items, and you'll get to see their status, whether they were approved, if they've been revised. So there's a number of reports. I don't remember them exactly the numbers, but if you go into the reports module, you'll see that each report has a little description under the link, and it will tell you what the report is for. So you'll be looking for one of the voucher reports.
And if you have any vouchers, this is a special case, but quite a few of you have had over time draw vouchers that were over your draw threshold, over $1 million or over $5 million. And those will have, in many cases, especially the recent ones, you will have uploaded some documents to the system for those, so those are also available. If you go back, once you find the voucher in the system, in the report, you can go look up the voucher in the system and you'll see the attached documents. They give you the even greater detail that you submitted to us.
Exactly. Yeah, there's lots of cool features that can help you access the information you've entered over time. And so if there's something you need to find out, there's probably a way to do it. If you can't figure it out, you can always submit an AAQ and someone will help you, walk you through that. You can also ask your field office rep to help you out. And then there's a question that says, is HUD in agreement with changing the national objective and for the activity type? I think she's talking about activity type. For changing the activity type from acquisition general to rehab, as we discussed before.
That was an example.
Yeah.
It is an example that comes up fairly often. And people were doing acquisition for rehab and putting it under acquisition general instead of putting it under rehab. But if you look at the entitlement regs, you can see that acquisition for rehab is actually under the rehab reg at 57202. So it's just the wrong measures come up if you put it under acquisition general. You can't get at the things that you need to measure. So
exactly.
if you have one of those cases, so that was meant to be an example. It shouldn't have said must on the slide, but it did. But there are quite a lot of, that example is very common. It happened a lot in the beginning.
Yeah. And so with all of these, if you're going to make a big change, you want to talk to your reps and just make sure that the changes make sense for your program too.
Right.
Okay, and I think this might be our last question unless we get another one. They say that they're working with a consultant for closeout package assistance, and they've asked me to verify that all beneficiary information has been entered. How might I provide confirmation? So the best way to provide confirmation is to do the reconciliation to compare your internal records to your reports, and once you've completed that process, you can let them know that you've completed it. There's not really a way to verify it through some sort of documentation, but the idea really is that you're making sure that you've gone in and you've done the process of looking at your internal records, looking what's in DRGR, and then telling your closeout consultant person that, yes, I have done that work and everything looks great. So the point of the closeout package assistance, and we talked about this in the previous webinar, but is really to sort of be a quality control, quality check kind of stop before the closeout package gets to the field office. So they'll work with you before you receive the closeout package to make sure that you're actually ready to close out, and that's part of that is reconciling DRGR, making sure that the grantee's internal records match the DRGR records. And the only way to confirm that is to ask the grantee if that's true, and we have to take you on your word for it, obviously, knowing that really it's in your best interest for those things to match in case you were to ever get audited. But once you've confirmed that for the consultant, then they will relay that information to the field office, and then from there, the field office will work with you directly on the closeout package. And so they'll send you the closeout package, you'll complete it, and the consultant will take a look at it before it goes back to HUD, but you'll send it back to HUD. And once it goes back to HUD, then the closeout agreement will be fully executed and the grant will be closed. So it's really just a way to just share information with each other to make sure all these different closeout criteria are met. Take some of the burden off of the field office.
I mean, this sounds like a lot, I think, to some people. And I just want to say that I sort of have two minds about this. One is you all, with only one exception, got more than $1 million or more of taxpayer money and got to use it to help stabilize your communities. And so we published the information requirements up front, and we need to get those at the end so that we make sure that the money was spent properly. But the other thing is that it is looking as if, from the evaluations we've done of NSP, that it was a successful program, and there's an intense interest in studying where and why it was successful and unsuccessful, and getting the best data into the system that we can is really going to help advance the practice of community development going forward, particularly in really tough times, like when we rolled out NSP. It would be good to know what works and doesn't work in a housing crisis. So you can think of yourself as helping that effort as well as being accountable for your grant programs. And we're doing everything we can with kind of constrained resources to make sure that there's assistance there to help you close out and finish telling the story.
All right, thank you.
Well, I'm impressed that 3/4 of you have stayed with us all the way through the questions and answer period. So
yeah, and we're still getting questions, so it's good.
Yeah. Next time you come to the HUD building, we'll give you a gold star. So I wanted to mention a couple things briefly. One is that we have published a couple of biweekly expenditure reports and have been noticing some problems with, there seems to be some ghost in the system that is messing with some of the expenditure numbers, and it's causing a number of grantees to look like they have not yet spent an amount equal to their original grant, which, you know, is a process that we resolved for ourselves about 3 years ago. So so there's clearly something wrong there. So we're working on it, but we're not going to be able to put any more up for a while, just to make sure that we're giving you good information. The other is that the instructions for the program income transfer are virtually complete. Do you want to mention that?
Sure. Yes, so we are finalizing the actual the procedures, the steps to guide you in transferring program income from DRGR to the CDBG program, and we expect to issue those in the very near future. If not this week, then early next week, but we are in the final steps. Jesse might want to know.
No, I'm writing a notice because our lawyers aren't doing what I want. I'm sulking in the corner.
Right. It took us a little bit because we collected, we circulated them, and we now have all comments, and we're just incorporating those comments.
Right. And so in the meantime, you have available the slides from last week, which are, you know, are the same thing, but in slightly less detail. And then I know we were trying to get the slides up for today before the presentation. I don't know how far that, if we made that or not. Jennifer, do you know?
Ernie, were the slides able to get onto the Resource Exchange before the session started?
Yeah, they will be uploaded after this call.
Okay, all right. And then the last thing is I'd just like to thank Jennifer from all of us for all her hard work on this. There's not enough of us to do this, and she's been spending a lot of time and good energy on bringing us along here with these slides and so forth. So thanks, Jennifer.
Oh, thanks, John. Yeah, happy to talk about all this. And that all of our talk here gave us a few more folks some time for questions, and some of them are pretty quick, so we could knock these out. Somebody asked, what is the timeline for closeout?
Well, there's no strict timeline. We want you to do it as quickly as possible, but, you know, after you've completed a good program. So focus on getting your program completed, and if you have legitimate problems, let us know. I mean, we can still provide you with program technical assistance if you're stuck selling properties or renting properties or whatever. But there is no absolute deadline for closeouts.
Mm-hmm. someone asks, how do I find beneficiary information? And so in order to find the beneficiary information, you want to be pulling performance reports 1 and 6 that we talked about today. Those are going to give you the income, race, ethnicity, and female-headed household beneficiary information, and that's all the information you're putting into the system. So that'll give you everything you need. Somebody asks, in addition to making changes in the action plan, could you advise what else needs to be done to change acquisition general activities to rehab activities? And so again, like Jesse was just explaining, this is something you want to talk with your field office rep. You want to consider what the end use was for the activity. So you're only changing it if the end use was something other than general acquisition. So if it was a rehab activity and you do want to make the change and your field office agrees that it's the right thing to do, then you're going to need to do a number of steps. And the steps are going to really depend on how you set up your action plan initially. If there's an existing so the steps are, I was just confusing two things in my head. The steps are that you would go into your action plan and you would change the activity type. That's going to require you to submit your action plan to HUD for approval. And once you make that change to the activity type, it may change the performance measures that you need to report on. And so it may require that in your action plan, you also are choosing from among some proposed accomplishments that you propose to do so that they show up in your QPR so you can report on the actuals. And so depending on which activity type you choose is going to trigger perhaps additional performance measures that you need to report on. And so all of that, if you need help with that, you can always submit a question. All right, and so someone asked, can we close one activity fund it with line of credit and transfer that to the other activity so we can do our last few draws?
You mean, can you change the of an activity to?
I think what she's saying is, so maybe they budgeted more than they needed in line of credit funds for one activity, and can they transfer that money to another activity to complete the last few draws?
There's a couple of things that need to be unpacked here. First of all, nobody should have too much line of credit funds left to mess around with. But this is only an NSP 1 and 3 question because the NSP 2 lines of credit have been swept. So you have to decrease the one that's losing, that doesn't need the funds, and then increase the other. You can't do it in the other order.
Right, exactly.
The action plan.
Yep, exactly. So you can pull Financial Report 7A to help you see what's been budgeted for all of your activities and what the obligations are. So you would, as Jesse said, you go to your action plan, you reduce the budgets of the activity where you're reducing the line of credit funds, and then you would increase the budgets of the other activities. Keeping in mind that you can never reduce a budget below the amounts you've already obligated and drawn. And so then also when you would increase those other budgets before you could spend the money, you'd have to go into the drawdown module and increase the obligations for that activity. And also keeping in mind that at the activity and project levels, your budgets really include line of credit and program, any estimated PI all in one number. So, but if you look at the Financial Report 7A, you will see all of the budget, obligation, and draw information, and that'll help you sort of map out what changes you need to make. And I think there's just one more question, and that question is, for land bank properties that have gone through disposition to development, meeting a new national objective, do we remove that property from the land bank? How do we handle this for closeout? So for land bank properties that have gone through disposition to development, meeting a new national objective, do we remove that property from the land bank, and how do we handle it for closeout?
I mean, it's not in the land bank anymore, but I mean, you did acquire it. Think of DRGR as your report is showing your use of program funds. So you did acquire it. you paid for some disposition costs. Those are going to show up.
The land banking costs.
And you disposed of them, and that address was treated. You don't have to make a change just because, you know, you disposed of it and then subsequent owner redeveloped it.
Mm-hmm.
That's not part of the NSP story, but and you don't have to go back and delete anything. We're not erasing our tracks in the sand. I may be confused about the question.
Yeah, that's all the info we have. This might be a good one for you to submit to probably to the NSP pool. I think this is a little more of a policy-oriented question than a DRGR technical question. So if that does not answer your question, feel free to submit it to the AAQ. And from there, so one more question, sorry. We've got a couple minutes, so I'll let them sneak it in. The question is, what goes into the acquisition general category? What kind of activity would qualify as just acquisition general?
The ones that would qualify as acquisition general that are like straight up righteous acquisition general are ones that I mentioned before, where typically they're the grantee acquired a property or one subrecipient acquired a property and transferred it. You know, maybe you did a competition for a developer and then you transferred it to a developer or a subrecipient who, or more likely a subrecipient, or to another state agency in some cases we saw, who then did the rehab on the property or construction on the property. And so you have two activities there because we tell you, we instruct you to split activities when you have different responsible entities. So acquisition general would be the original acquisition. You would create the rehab for the second entity who's doing the rehab, but you would associate the two so you only have to report on performance elements one time.
Mm-hmm. That's helpful.
I think there's probably other circumstances for acquisition general, but it definitely doesn't apply to land bank acquisitions. But typically it's because the entity changed between the two. Another one was in some cases we were seeing acquisitions of big portfolios. And then, you know, maybe 3 properties or 10 properties in a portfolio, and they may have gone to different activities with different entities, but you'd have a single big acquisition sitting there. Mm-hmm. That can happen as well.
Great. Okay, well, with that takes us to the very end, and so thank you all for hanging on and staying with us through this, what can be sometimes a dry topic, DRGR, but a very important topic. We want to remind you all that this was recorded and will be posted on the Resource Exchange along with the slides. The slides should actually be up there already. They're not there right now. They should be there later this afternoon. And then a transcript will be made available as well. In addition to that, at the end of the webinar, once you go to close your screen, you'll get a survey that pops up. We'd love for you to complete the survey. We do look at the comments and make adjustments along the way for upcoming webinars. If you do have any policy questions or technical DRGR questions that we didn't get a chance to answer here today, although I think we got most of them, or all of them even, don't ask them there in the survey. Only comment on the webinar itself. If you have any policy or technical questions, please use the AAQ or the NSP-questions@HUD.gov mailbox. And thank you all for joining us. We do have another webinar coming up on August 16th, and more information will be forthcoming on that, but we hope to see you there. Same time, 2 p.m. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.